Thank you again, Ajay. Just want to say, seeing the prior HubMap talks this afternoon has been inspiring. The work that's going on is truly exemplary. And what I'm going to talk about is a real change in gears. Moving back from biology, I'm going to give you an overview of the infrastructure we've been building for HubMap and that we're trying to build to make the work of Cole and Mike and others possible. I'm the PI for the infrastructure and engagement component of HubMap. With me, well, let me first go to a quick outline. I'm going to talk about a number of things today. The approach to why we're building what we're doing, the hybrid cloud architecture we've adopted along with microservices, how we're treating our different kinds of data and metadata internally, and then a very quick introduction to the APIs, your application programming interfaces, security, and how pipelines are executed on our hybrid architecture. I'd be happy to follow up with people afterward. I'd like to put my acknowledgements at the front just because these essentially are co-authors on the talk. Jonathan Silverstein at Pitt is the multiple PI for the HubMap IEC. And then there's a large team at the University of Pittsburgh, Department of Biomedical Informatics, as well as the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, who have been helpful in designing and building this infrastructure. So our approach is that we've really designed the HubMap portal, which is the single web interface to HubMap data and tools, to be built on interoperating microservices. And the point of that is distributing the development. Excuse me. It lets us collaborate more easily. It makes a very flexible, extensible system. We've just finished year 2 of HubMap, and requirements are evolving. We're learning more as we go. There are new tissue mapping centers coming on board. And so we know we're going to have to be growing and expanding as we go. We're committed to fair data, both within HubMap and across the NIH ecosystem. And I'll go into a lot of detail on the hybrid execution on private and public clouds. And that's where I want to begin. So where we're building HubMap is a combination. It's leveraging very large-scale resources at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. These are National Science Foundation investments, or NSF. And they are, by definition and by law, available at no charge for open research. Those are then interfaced with RESTful APIs, your application programming interfaces, and data exchange to public cloud resources. And I'll say more about these in detail momentarily. But as a quick intro, the kinds of things that live on our resources on-prem are the primary data, the file service, the API for doing data ingest, that's actually in the cloud as well, and the primary place for pipeline execution. In the public cloud or many other things, these are high availability, databases, and other things where we want to have that sort of resilience and uptime. So the advantage of on-prem is that we have advanced computing. It's what we do. And the resources we have are not available anywhere else, in many cases, in the world. There's not the commercial market to justify a public cloud instance. And as I said, these are available at no charge. We also tend to build our own storage, and we do that very cost effectively, leveraging agreements and relationships we have, and by doing things at cost. The on-prem resources we're talking about here are really 3 initially. The first one is Bridges. This was really the first system in the world that brought together high-performance computing, AI, and big data. And we brought this up in 2016. It's getting quite old. It is scheduled to run through this November. It has about 29,000 cores, a lot of GPUs, a lot of storage, about 17 petabytes, and enormous amounts of RAM, up to 12 terabytes per node. So we're doing things like genome sequence assembly. This is outstanding, but it's just it's a solid general purpose system. We then introduced Bridges AI. This has an NVIDIA DGX2, which until recently was the most powerful AI system you could get, and a lot more a lot more AI targeted GPUs. And this fall, we are introducing Bridges 2. And that has about 70,000 cores. Basically, everything we have proven with Bridges 1 and things we have learned, we're expanding, making bigger, better, and amplifying Bridges 2. So it has a lot of great features. There's a YouTube webinar on that if you'd like to learn more, or contact me. But the point for HubMap is these are resources we can use, we can wire into the HubMap portal for executing pipelines, for doing analytics, for doing pre and post processing, and for researchers to do their own work, potentially against HubMap data. There's another new resource I'd like to mention here. This is called Neocortex. Ajay mentioned it in the intro. This is a new system that really is the world's most powerful AI system. And we've scaled it to 2 of them because we like to look at scalability, recognizing that no single machine is ever big enough for one thing. So this is an 800,000 core resource. We're having a webinar tomorrow about this at 2 p.m. Eastern. There's a link here, or just look me up and sign up. There's still some spots left. And the point of this is that when we look at very large-scale HubMap data, and we recognize we're going to have to be doing deep learning on some of it to do the kinds of things we want to do. We've already had conversations with other consortia where we would like to be able to apply deep learning to bring together our data of different modalities and different kinds to be able to get medical information. And so having these world-class resources available to HubMap is potentially a game changer. Now, the other side of this is public cloud. So we designed HubMap to be this hybrid architecture of on-prem and public cloud. Public cloud gives us a lot of complementarity and other value. So it gives us very high reliability and availability. So for things like the HubMap portal and the databases that underlie HubMap, we want those to be up with many, many nines of reliability. And we get that in the cloud. We also get collaboration with other consortia like HCA, Kids First, and others whose data happens to be in Amazon, or later potentially Google or others. We also are using Glacier for real disaster recovery. We have HubMap data backed up locally, but Glacier is the separate spot if there would be some disaster that wipes out our whole data center, even though it is secure also. Public cloud gives us a lot of that. And lastly is that we're doing our data release, as Mike mentioned, toward the end of July. And we don't really know how many users there will be, and over time, that's hard to predict and what they will do. Now, we can host a lot of usage locally, but cloud is another place for burst. We have a relationship with AWS through the Strides program, that will also be an avenue for users to potentially compute there as well as to use their own credits. So that's the physical infrastructure. I'm not going into a lot of detail about the disks and the SSDs and all of that. That's beyond the scope of this talk and this time. I want to talk more about the software infrastructure because that's how things actually work, and that's how people can potentially collaborate with us moving forward. So the first part of that is the microservices. The whole point is that all of the boxes here, the cylinders are, think of as data stores. The boxes are services. So they're services for data ingest, for the APIs to farm off those calls, and then those call down to the universal identifiers, search and index, ontology, all the different APIs that you need to make things work. And the point of the microservices with RESTful interfaces is these can be independently developed. So our team does some of these. Nils's team, who you'll hear from shortly, does others at Harvard Medical School. The interfaces that Kati is developing also use them. We're all using them independently as a common means of communicating. And they abstract what we're doing. They also allow us to develop using the tools and languages that are most appropriate for each task. And they abstract what the data accesses are to the actual data below them. The data representation was alluded to in the previous slide. And there are really four pieces I'd like to talk about today. There's the file store, which is actually where all the data lives, the raw data, the processed data, and so on. That's what's actually big. There's, sorry, my mouse is getting away from me. There's all of the metadata, provenance, and ontology. So the file store lives in Lustre. It's a high-performance parallel file system, which we can then do searches on. We can send parts of it that people want to operate on, potentially to AWS or to other places to compute. These other pieces, they're essentially graphical information we maintain in Neo4j. It's a graph database. That's on AWS. As are the next two. The UUIDs, potentially there will be billions to trillions of those if they're associated with single cell data and below. Those are in MySQL currently, also in AWS. Then the search indices are in Elasticsearch, and those we can add to, reindex, and build as we need, depending on what the use cases turn out to be. So very quickly going through each of these, the file store is what can be large. When we began HubMap, we visited all of the tissue mapping centers at the time. And we learned that the data can be big. NMR data from Vanderbilt University, for example, even after some pre-processing, can still be up to 50 terabytes per experiment. 500 terabytes before that pre-processing to eliminate signal we don't care about. And so Lustre is designed for exactly that. This is from the high-performance computing world. It has heavy support from the DOE labs, and it's a robust, resilient, scalable solution that gives us very good performance for that kind of data. And that we're maintaining locally. Neo4j is what we use as a graph natural representation for basically the knowledge base, the provenance graph, and so all the information where you want to be able to track where a given data set came from, all the way back through the tissue samples, the organ, and the donor, to be able to have that provenance, on workflows and pipelines, and then connecting those with the ontology, the controlled vocabularies, to let people do search and do analysis on this. UUIDs are just that. Essentially, every data object in HubMap automatically gets a UUID, and those UUIDs can be turned into digital object identifiers, or DOIs, when we want to reference those for credit and citations. This can potentially be very large, and we're working with the community on understanding what the right level is for making DOIs available as well. And the last piece of the data is search indices. So these are what we're maintaining in Elasticsearch to be able to provide very faceted search. We potentially can have as many Elasticsearch sets of indices as we need for different use cases. The APIs are, there are many in the project. The ones I want to talk about right here relate to data ingest. And so by data ingest, I'm referring to the process where the tissue mapping centers, say Coles Group with Washington and others, upload data. And then that data is pre-processed, it is approved by the group that put it in to verify everything is in good shape, and it goes through various stages. So the ingest API controls that. It not only manages the uploading data, but also the step of doing the initial pre-processing and the quality control and quality assurance. That all is through the ingest API. The UUID API creates unique identifiers. Search and index both support searching and re-indexing of the Elasticsearch indices. And then the Ontology API is what lets us do the cross-referencing across various controlled biomedical vocabularies. And my partner in the infrastructure component, Jonathan Silverstein, is really working in depth on the ontologies with Cuddy. And then the entity API returns information about entities. And by that, I mean things like in the figure on the right. So there's a donor for each of these hierarchy trees that goes to an organ. An organ has one or more sample blocks. The sample blocks may or may may contain slices or not. And then those have data sets from the assay. And then their data sets emerge from the pipeline running against the assay. And so that is all maintained for full provenance. So we basically want to be sure that people can know what has been done with the data and what has passed through. One thing I did not mention in detail with this is that pipelines themselves are maintained in containers, either Docker or Singularity. And so it's also very easy to control that system, to be able to know what all the versions were, and really to get to actually having real reproducibility. Security is something we pay a lot of attention to, because in HubMap we have different kinds of data. We have imaging, genomic, and proteomic data. And obviously these have different degrees of sensitivity with respect to being able to infer identifiable characteristics. The way this works is we are using Globus as a very robust, mature service for single sign-on. Essentially all universities participate in Globus to some degree and can easily get involved if they're not already. So the user authenticates by Globus. They work through the ingest user interface or the Airflow user interface through HTTP, just over a web browser. They get the Globus token through this. And then the Globus token follows them through all the APIs that ensures they have very fine-grained access to the given user based on their credentials, whether they are, say, a member of the consortium or an end user or someone else. We can very accurately ensure they can get to the data they need to and not the rest. What we're doing for almost all data for HubMap is serving it from the HubMap portal. The one exception is really the genomic data that is potentially identifiable. For that, we're serving metadata, we're allowing searches. And for people who need to get at the actual data, that is maintained in dbGaP. And so they could then apply their data use agreement through dbGaP and get to what they need legally and securely. The last real topic I want to mention is how we execute our pipelines in this infrastructure. And we're using a framework called Airflow. Airflow is fairly robust. It was actually initially developed by Airbnb and released as an Apache project. And the point of Airflow is to be able to schedule containerized pipelines on different backend resources. They are expressed as directed acyclic graphs. And so it's very easy to have a reproducible workflow that executes. You can see where it is. They're expressed using standards. And we're using standards throughout HubMap to be sure we are interoperable. In this case, it's a common workflow language. And a job runner then executes these workflows. They're expressed in that way. And the pipelines are containerized. We're supporting Docker right now and Singularity. Docker is certainly very flexible and popular. Singularity is much more secure for shared environments. When people work with the ingest pipeline, the quality control things are automatically run along with initial processing. There are also analytic pipelines, and all of these are examples of what happens at runtime. So an example of what this looks like for the user is an RNA-Seq pipeline in Airflow is expressed as this directed acyclic graph on the left. Directed just means there's essentially an arrow going from one node to the next. Those don't show in this graph, but they're implicit. Acyclic just means there are no cycles, so it is deterministic. And then there is a dashboard that shows you whether jobs have succeeded, whether running, failed, skipped, or so on. And so it lets people track their progress throughout the system. So in summary, I can't believe I'm on time for a talk. What we've really built is an infrastructure that is designed to be flexible, that's number one, but also extensible, very collaborative, and to promote fair data. We're also working with the CFDE core for additional indexing and so forth. The hybrid cloud approach we did for several reasons. It's very flexible. It's also extremely cost effective. We're delivering much more than we could have otherwise. And we're giving users performance that they could not get in other places. And finally, we're applying modern software engineering to ensure that everything is robust, that we can operate across the HubMap consortium, as well as with other consortia. There have been questions about how this relates to HCA, for example. We're talking to them, we're talking to Spark, to Kids First, to many others, about how we would be able to bring our data together. And the modern principles and standards and interfaces are ways of doing that. So I'd like to stop it there and take questions.
Thanks, Nick. We have one question. What ontologies do you include?
So we're working on that. Let us get back to you. There's not an easy answer. We're connecting to the standard popular ontologies. We're avoiding the ones that have expensive licensing considerations on them. But it will actually be more than one. If you have interest, let us know and we'll be happy to factor them in.
Thank you. In